I wouldn't exactly consider us friends. I'd say we're a little more than that, wouldn't you? Okay, Meli, make up your mind. Are you friends? Are you not friends? Are you just friends? What? All I'm saying is that if you and him are just friends, does that mean he's single? Because, I might know someone who's interested. What am I doing? I don't even know anymore. Hey guys, welcome to chapter 10 of the Castor Saga. If you're new here, we have about 9 chapters before this, as well as the prologue to go check out before. Spoiler alert, you have been warned. If you haven't already, subscribe below. Chapter 11 will be coming out very soon after this one, so hit that notification bell so you get notified. Without further delay, Chapter 10, The Forest of Dreams. If there were any dreams or plants in this forest, you wouldn't know it. Being the opposite of the forest of mirrors that reflected all light, this forest absorbed all light, leaving a visual experience that was entirely pitch black. It was like watching a black movie screen rotate all around you. Meli smiled back at them and spoke with eagerness. All right, who's first? Huh? We each take a turn walking in front, and everyone will see your greatest dream as you walk through what will be a vision of your greatest hopes in life or death. They were quiet for a moment as they all considered what she said. They were all kind of nervous, except for Meli, of course. Finally, Jake stepped up and smiled. I'll go first. You already know my dream. Jake stepped up by Meli and she gestured to him forward. He took a step forward and everyone began to follow him. Jake immediately began having visions of his mother in front of him. She was tall, with black hair, and her eyes were brown. Mother? She reached out her hand to him, and he ran forward, as if to grab her hand, but Meli grabbed his arm and kept him there with them on the tracks. Jake's mother blew him a kiss and waved, then disappeared as he waved back to her. She vanished, and then Jake looked at Meli. Melissa, I wanted to go with her. Jake, I'm sorry, but your mother's still dead. This place shows you your dreams, but you can't act on them here. It shows you what awaits you later in life, but you can't act on it now. If you leave the tracks, you'll vanish like your mother did. That's the torturous part about this place. You may get to live your dream, or you may not. Jake nodded and tilted his head down. When he raised his head and smiled, tears were flowing out of his eyes. He tried to hold them back, but he couldn't anymore. I miss her so much. It was beautiful to see her. I know. Meli looked back at her friends and smiled. All right, who's next? The others went and saw a variety of different dreams. Luke saw Allie dancing and happy as she wandered the grass field in front of them. When he saw her, he felt so torn in the heart. He shouted out to her, hoping she'd hear him. I love you, Allie. She smiled and blew him a kiss back, and he was almost brought to tears as well. Every single one of them almost cried when they saw their dreams in front of them, but some tried to hide it more than others. Each saw lots of food, and he cried because he'd grown up in a poor family and they often didn't have enough to eat. He saw his family with all the food, and he was happy that they had enough now. Keith saw his baby sister, who had struggled with cancer for years, playing on the playground. He wanted to run with her and push her on the swings and run with her through the flower garden, but he knew he couldn't go. Meli held each of their hands to keep them on the tracks. John saw Rose in his dream, and when Rose saw her own image dancing around blissfully, she grabbed onto John and kissed his cheek. John saw the real image of her on the tracks and hugged her tightly as she kissed him. Chrissy went and saw herself singing to a large audience with 2 other girls who weren't visible to them. She laughed and danced down the tracks, but the image soon faded for her as well. Dawn went and saw a beautiful beach where she stood with a dark, shaded-out man who wrapped his arms around her and hugged her tightly. Dawn blushed, knowing the others could see it as well. It faded, and then Rose stepped up. Rose's dream was a little blurry, but they could distinguish for the most part what it was. Rose was a little girl, dancing around what appeared to be her living room with her father. This was the point that Rose started to cry. Her father had apparently been a very good one, but had died in a car accident when a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and pushed his car off a bridge into a river. She'd been adopted by her aunt and her uncle. But there he was, dancing with Rose again in her living room. It was apparent that many of the Castors had lost loved ones or had bad childhoods. Tony stepped up to take his turn, but he stopped walking and glanced down at Meli with a kind, caring, and charming smile. She stopped and looked up at him, seeing he was looking down at her. Tony? He just smiled and continued to look down at her with his kind eyes and loving expression. She stared up at him, blushing slightly, then glanced back at the others. Could you guys... She made a motion with her hand over her eyes, and they all nodded kindly. The girls all pulled the guys to bow their heads down with their eyes closed. Then they did the same. Meli looked back up at Tony, and he stared at her with a cute but corny smile. She couldn't look at him any longer. She turned her head away to the side, smiling, but when she did, she didn't expect his response. He leaned down close to her and kissed her cheek gently, then whispered in her ear in a quiet but strong voice. Thank you, Melissa. Meli looked back up at him as he leaned away, and she nodded, though her face was red and blushing. He laughed and patted her on the head, then looked out across the open area. Everyone raised their heads back up and looked at them as they continued walking with them. That's when Tony looked out and saw what his dream had been. He saw himself floating in what appeared to be an endless motion of light and energy. His vision self floated up into the wide open sky, and he just followed them down the tracks, spinning around above them in the empty space. Rose glanced at Meli and made a comment because she was kind of confused by what the dream was. Meli, what's Tony's dream? To be free. So, that's why he thanked you? You set him free? Yeah, something like that. Meli nodded as Tony's dream image faded into the openness of the forest. That's when everyone looked at Melissa. All right, let's get out of here, guys. Wait, but you didn't go. Huh? You didn't watch your dream, Meli. They were all confused but smiling at her. She looked back up at them with a shy smile. I already saw my dream, guys. What do you mean? Keith spoke, kind of confused. We didn't see it, though. Yes, you did. You're seeing it now. You won't understand it, but you're all a part of it. The others nodded confused, then followed her as they walked out of the forest. Some of them understood. Some of them didn't. But everyone would understand eventually. As they walked out into the gate area, they realized they'd been in the forest longer than what it seemed. It had already gotten dark, and they didn't even have time to set up a camp. They just quickly conjured up a little fire, and all sat around it quietly. Finally, Meli broke the silence. We, are going through the most deadly forest tomorrow, so everyone be ready and rested. It's a bit farther down the tracks than the others. It would be helpful if everyone was confident in their abilities by morning, so either sleep or practice. It's very important. Why is that, Meli? Because tomorrow, the forest we're going through is called the Forest of Poison. And the terror there is what exactly? Meli stood and walked over to Jake with a look in her eyes as if a demon had possessed her and her anger was growing to expel itself. Her sudden mood swing confused and frightened everyone. The plants will literally attack us and drag us off the tracks into poisonous weeds that can kill on contact. Unless you are immune to poison, thorns, and can survive off the tracks, then I suggest you get practicing. Tony grabbed Meli and pulled her back, sitting her down beside him. Meli, calm down. You're scaring everyone. Meli shook herself from the trance and looked up at everyone's confused and terrified faces. I'm so sorry. I blacked out for a moment. What happened? Maybe whoever's after you had you possessed for a moment. Maybe. I'm really sorry. It's fine. Now, you were talking about the Forest of Poison? Oh, okay. The Forest of Poison is deadly because the poison gets to your mind and body and can kill you in a matter of minutes. However, there's no gate between the Forest of Poison and the forest after, which is the Forest of Golden Rain. The Golden Raindrops will heal the poison if we can get there in time. It's not going to be easy, though. So basically, we're walking into hell, but if we make it through, we can stay in heaven for the night. Well, yeah. The Forest of Golden Rain should be safe to stay in at night. We just gotta get there in one day. Rose and Chrissy spoke, sounding sure of themselves. We can do that. Yeah, we've made it this far. Just be careful. Watch each other's backs and stay close. Also, you will probably get yanked off the tracks. Everyone spoke at the same time. What? Yeah. The key is to stay calm and get back to the tracks as soon as possible. How do you expect us to do that? John looked worried as he said that. Alright, guys. I'm dropping the act. No more nice, Meli. You guys need to get it together. It's time to act like you know what the hell you're doing. Dawn spoke, sounding entirely confused. But, Meli, we don't know what we're doing. Well, then fake it! They were confused by what she said, and she could tell. Meli paused a moment and stood up, pacing behind Tony. She then stopped and kneeled on the log that Tony was leaning back against, with his arm up on the back of it as he relaxed. You think I know what I'm doing? Yeah. Well, I'll be honest with you. I ain't got a freaking clue. Sure, I see things, I know what to expect, but I never know if I'm gonna make it out alive. It's why I go in like it's my last fight every single time. You have to fight, and be confident in yourself. Believe you can do it, and you can do it. That's why most normos never use their magic. They don't believe in themselves like we do. Everyone started smiling as she stepped over the log and plopped down beside Tony. Tony's arm was still back against the log, and Meli leaned into him as she looked around at everyone. Tony had a mischievous smirk on his face like he'd had so many times before. I already know Tony's with me. What do you say, guys? You ready to raise some hell and go out fighting? They all smiled at each other and began practicing as Meli nodded, watching them. Some of them were a little confused, because they thought Meli knew what she was doing. What she didn't let them know was she did. She only said what she said so they would feel like if she could do it, they could do it too. As the others practiced, Tony stood beside Meli watching the others. After a few minutes, he kind of smirked as he spoke to her with his arms crossed over his chest. Why did you tell them you don't know what you're doing? I'm sorry? You know exactly what you're doing, so why tell them otherwise? Meli paused a moment, then stepped over beside him, her arms also resting across her chest as she spoke quietly so the others wouldn't hear her. You are the only one I want to know how powerful I really am, and for good reason. What reason exactly? Rule number 11. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer is an overrated saying used by people who need confirmation that their actions aren't inappropriate. A better saying is, love is blind, in many forms, but just barely. Friends and enemies are really one and the same if you believe them to be. Tony's smirk changed into a wicked grin as he turned away from the others, then leaned down beside Meli as he whispered to her. So, am I your friend or your enemy? Meli looked at him with a very flirtatious grin as she grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him forward down to her level. That depends. On what? I wouldn't exactly consider us friends. I'd say we're a little more than that, wouldn't you? Absolutely. Well then, I guess we can never be enemies if we're a little more than friends, don't you think? Yes, ma'am. So then. She let go of his shirt and smiled, turning back towards the others. I guess you have my answer. Tony began to walk away, an excited smile radiating from his face. But before he got very far away, Meli said his name and he turned back to face her. Tony. He kind of lazily walked back over to her and looked down at her sideways. Yes? Meli's expression was suddenly very serious and almost kind of sad. Don't betray my trust, please. I'd be heartbroken if you did. Tony leaned down beside her and very softly whispered to her. Wouldn't dream of it. Tony gently kissed her cheek, then hesitated when he leaned away, letting his lips gently caress the side of her face before he leaned back and looked deeply into her eyes. Of all the people in this world that could betray you, I'm not one of them. I'm a little more loyal than that. I'm not entirely sure what you mean, but I think when the time comes, I'll know. Meli smiled and nodded as he turned to go practice with the others. They were ready to face the final challenges, but the trick was getting them to believe in themselves, not just in her. That's why Meli had said what she said. She didn't mean to lie to them, but if they didn't believe in themselves by this point, then it was unlikely that they'd make it to the end, let alone stay alive. As for Tony, Meli had a feeling he would have made it through on his own even without her help. He was strong, smart, much more powerful than he realized. That's why she wanted him on her side. It was her against the world in a lot of instances, and it was good to know that she had Tony as backup if she needed it. And that concludes Chapter 10. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you guys are enjoying the story and the show. If you haven't already, subscribe below. Thank you all very much for watching. I love you very much. Until next time. Bye.